Hey guys, how you going? My name is Dom, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to make a CSS-only responsive gauge. So this right here is going to be the final product. Now you can of course use this for whatever use case you want. For example, you might want to show live data that's constantly being updated, or you might want to even show progress on a particular item in your application. Okay, so like I said, it's going to be CSS only and responsive, which means if I was to resize this window, we can see the gauge is going to resize alongside it, okay, which of course makes it really useful or easy to fit into existing layouts or templates, and of course it's going to be supported nicely on mobile devices. Now the only JavaScript which is going to be required for this is going to be to actually set the updated value, but I'm going to be showing you that anyway. So let's go inside this tab right here and begin from scratch to of course create the gauge. So in the text editor, all I've got here is essentially a gauge.css file, which is empty but included inside my HTML. So let's work on each individual part of the HTML first before moving on to the CSS until we reach our final product, which then I'm going to be showing you the JavaScript to of course update that value. So first, let's make a new container, and this right here is going to be essentially the container for the gauge. So a class of gauge makes sense, and now inside here we're going to need a second element called gauge underscore underscore body, and this is just going to represent the body of the gauge, and as usual I'm going to be using the block element modifier CSS naming convention, but you can of course name these classes whatever you like. Okay, so now I might just stop here and put some CSS styles on these two elements just to see where we're actually at. So inside the CSS, let's firstly target the container class and set a width of 100% and a maximum width of 250 px. So this right here is what's going to make our solution responsive. The gauge is going to try to reach 100% width, but we're going to be stopping it at 250, and of course that combination makes it responsive and makes it resize on mobile. Okay, we can move on to the gauge body element here, or class, and for this one we're going to be setting a width of 100%. That way it just takes up what this one is set to. Okay, so basically this right here is going to mean 250 px in most cases. Okay, and to achieve a 2:1 ratio, because we need to make this essentially so that the gauge height is half the amount of the width. So to achieve that, we can say height equal to 0 and then padding bottom equal to 50%. So this right here is kind of hacky. I found this solution online, but essentially you're able to make the height of the element half the size of the width by specifying 50% right here and 100% right here. So now let's just go back inside here and set a background just to see how we're progressing. So I'm going to be setting the background here to be just a dark grey greenish color. So I'm going to say hash and then B4 C0 B and then E. Let's save this and refresh the browser to see our progress, and we get this right here. As we can see, we get a 250 px div, and they're both the same width and height. Of course the body has the background, and we can see that the half height solution has worked perfectly fine. And also I want to mention that this color here is what gets shown as the remaining amounts left in the actual meter, so this color right there. Okay, let's go back inside here and apply a position of relative. This is going to be useful a bit later on when we start actually putting the meter in. Okay, and also here we're going to be setting a border top left radius of 100% and then 200%. So essentially I'm not too sure on the maths behind how the border radius gets displayed, but I do know that you're basically saying here 100% for the horizontal axis and 200% for the vertical axis, which essentially is going to give us a semicircle as long as we do the same thing for the right. So that right there. So by applying these two properties, we're going to be converting our rectangle into a semicircle for the gauge. Let's save this and refresh the page, and we get this right here. So obviously we can see how it's sort of going to be structured. We've got this base body, and we're going to be using overflow hidden to essentially block out any other elements, which we're going to be creating a bit later on. But for now, let's go inside here and set overflow hidden and make that hidden. Now, I do want to just comment this out because I want to demonstrate how it's going to work, but essentially the final solution is going to have this set to hidden. But for now, let's keep it like that. And that is all for the gauge body. Let's move on to the next two elements, and the first one here is going to be the gauge _ fill. So for this one, essentially, it's just going to be an element which allows us to push up the actual percentage or the progress, and basically the fill is this green one here that moves around. So that's going to be the main element which we're going to be animating. So let's go inside the CSS now and target the gauge fill class. And for this one, we're going to be setting a position of absolute. So this is going to work in combination with the position relative up here, and it's going to allow us to set the top to be 100% and the left to be 0. We're going to be inheriting the width, so width, and set this to be inherit. That way this also gets a 250px width, okay, and the height is going to be 100%. Okay, and also a background of my dcode green color, so 009 and then 578. I'm going to stop here, save this and refresh the page, and we can see we get this right here. So we can see our position of top 100% has moved down the fill, and of course it is the same dimensions as our initial one without the border radius. Okay, so the way it's going to work is we're going to be rotating this fill element right at this pivot point in the middle, and it's going to move around like this, and that's going to give us our meter, if that makes sense. So we can demonstrate this. Let's just go back inside here. We're going to be setting the transform origin, and this is quite important. It's going to be center and then top. That way it's going to move our pivot point to this position right here where the mouse is hovering over. Okay, that way now on rotation it's going to rotate based off of that. Okay, let's also set here the transition to be transform at 0.2 seconds and then ease dash outs, and then alongside this we can set a transform, and let's set this to be rotates, and then let's just say 0.25 of a turn. So essentially here we are saying going to rotate the div to be 0.25 of a complete turn, so about something like this. And the transition here is going to make it so when this is being changed, it's going to transition with a nice animation. So let's save this and refresh the page, and we get this right here. So we can see it has moved a quarter of a turn, and if I was to go inside the actual CSS here in the browser and change this value, we can see it's spinning around in the center. So that right there is going to be the key to making sure our gauge works, and of course it's how it's going to actually fill up with progress. Okay, cool. So now let's go inside here and put this overflow back to hidden, and now essentially anything going over the bounds of this gauge body is going to be hidden. So let's save this and refresh, and we get this right here. So that is how it's going to work. So let's go back inside the text editor, and we're basically done with the gauge fill. Hope that makes sense. I found it quite interesting as a solution, but yeah, so anyway, let's put this back to hidden just for demonstration so we can see what's actually happening for the next part of this video. So anyway, let's go in the index.html and move on by creating a new element for gauge __cover. Okay, now this one here is going to be essentially containing our text, just this center bit right here. So essentially this element here needs to be a circle which gets pushed down just to cover up what we have right here. So let's go back inside here and set the gauge underscore cover class. And for the width of this one, we're going to be saying 75% and a height of 150%. So the reason for these kind of obscure values is this is basically saying we want the width of the center bit to be 25% less than the width of the whole gauge, and that right there is gonna be what gives us this gap right here. So we get 25% gap on in total. So 12.5 here, 12.5 here, 25 in total. So of course that is why we are setting this to be 75 and not 100. Same goes for the height. In our case, the height needs to be double. That way we can make an actual circle, if that makes sense. I can show you right now actually. And once again, the same thing, leaving a gap of 25% for each side. Let's just go here and set a background to be red. Alongside this, a position of absolute. And let's just save this here and stop and refresh the browser to see our progress. And we can see right there we get something like this. We've created a square, a perfect square, which is going to allow us to now make it into a circle using border radius. Set this to be 50%, okay, and I'll just move this up here. Let's save this and refresh, and we get this right here. Okay, and now it's going to be all about essentially moving our little circle to the middle on the vertical axis, and of course the middle on the horizontal axis. Okay, cool. Let's go back inside here. We're going to be setting a top of 25% and a left of 50%. So essentially the 25% here ensures that we're going to be pushing it down, of course 25%, which creates that gap, okay, and a left of 50% is so we can center it in combination with a transform of translate x and then negative 50% just like that. Okay, let's save this and refresh, and we get this right here. As we can see, the top property has pushed it down, and of course the left and the transform has centered it in the middle. Now, I did forget to mention the purpose of this position and then absolute. So of course, this is going to be working in combination with the position relative up here to allow us to position the actual cover relative to the main container. Okay. And now lastly, we can set the background of this to be white. That way we get something like this. Okay, cool. Now of course, let's go back inside here and remove this overflow hidden, save this and refresh, and now we get this right here. Okay, cool. I might just go back and once again comment that out and finish off the gauge cover. So we need to essentially be able to, of course, display some text for the percentage. So for that, let's put a comment and just say text. And we're going to be saying display flex and align items of center and a justify content also of center. And that right there is going to allow us to center that text. Okay, so percentage, a padding bottom of 25%, and that right there is going to be pushing up our text just a little bit. I might just comment this part out just for now, just to see our progress, and go back inside the index.html and put through here 50% as some text, for example. Let's save this and refresh, and we get this right here. As we can see, our text of course is centering in the middle of the gauge cover. Okay, so our padding bottom, as mentioned earlier, is going to be pushing that up just slightly, and a box sizing of border box is also important to of course ensure that our padding bottom does not blow out the height and width of the actual cover. Let's save this and refresh, and we get this right here. Of course, now the text is going to be slightly higher in the middle of the semicircle. So the very last thing to do in terms of the CSS is going to be setting a font family for the actual for the gauge percentage. Okay, so let's put this back to overflow hidden the way it should be, and go up here now and set a font family of Roboto. and then sans serif, and a font size of 32px, and also a color of 004033. That is a darker shade of my dcode green color. Now, with the font, you might need to make separate modifier classes to ensure you have different font sizes depending on your expected size of the gauge. So 32px here works in my situation from about 250px or 100px, sorry, to 400px. So basically, if the gauge is between 100 and 400 pixels, 32px seems to be fine. Like I said, you might want to make a separate modifier class, for example, gauge text small, just to change that font size if you need to, depending on your own situation and how you expect the gauge to be used. But that is what's going to happen for the font size. Let's save this and refresh the page, and now we get this right here, essentially our completed product, aside from the essential JavaScript to, of course, change the percentage value. So to achieve that, let's go inside the HTML, inside the script section, and we're going to be essentially, firstly, just getting a reference to our gauge. So we're going to be saying const gauge elements is equal to document.querySelector. We're going to be selecting the first element with a class of gauge, which in our case, of course, refers to this one right here. We can now make a function, and this function is going to be allowing us to set our gauge value. So we can say set gauge value, pass through here our gauge element and the value itself. So this value here is going to be between 0 and 1. Okay, let's go up here and say if your value is less than 0 or your value is greater than 1, then we're going to simply just return. You may want to handle this differently or not have it at all. Totally up to you. It's just to protect our gauge from getting basically invalid values. Okay, and now we can say gauge.querySelector. So firstly, we're going to be setting the rotation of the actual fill. So we can say here gauge__fill, okay, .style.transform is equal to, and then here using ES6 template strings with the backtick character here, we can say rotate and pass through here essentially our turn value. So we're going to be taking our value, which is going to be between 0 and 1, and we're going to be saying value and then divided by 2 and then pass through here turn, essentially giving us between 0 and 0.5 of a turn. This is important because if I just go back inside here and go on the actual fill element and then set this turn to be 0.5. I might just zoom in here so you can see a bit better. Hold on. Okay, so back on the fill. So 0.5 of a turn is going to be 100% of the actual fill. Okay, so 0.4, 80%, 3, 60%, and so on. So between 0 and 0.5 is our target range. So, sorry. To convert our 0 or our 1 into this value, we're going to simply divide by 2. Okay, let's go back inside here, and that's that. So now we can say gauge.querySelector, we can say gauge cover, so targeting the gauge cover element, and for this one we can say text content is equal to, once again using ES6 template strings, we can just say here math.round, we're going to be rounding our value times 100. So of course, for example, if we pass through 0.4, that's 40%. We can say 0.4 times 100 gives us 40, and we're just going to be rounding this to make up for any rounding inconsistencies we may come across. And then finally, we can just say % as the sign outside of our little expression here. And that is basically it. So now let's go down here and we can say essentially just set gauge value. As an example, we're going to pass through our gauge elements and pass through here secondly 0.3, so basically 30%. Let's get rid of our 50 up here, save this and refresh the page, and we get 30 right there. Okay, now of course, if I was to go in the console here and say, set gauge value, pass to the gauge element, pass to the gauge element once again, and pass to, for example, 1, press enter, we can see right there, got the nice smooth transition for the fill, and we can see it's working perfectly fine between that 0 and 1 range. So that right there is how to create a responsive CSS only gauge. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you later.